When the judge announced the verdict with a smug grin, Jack already knew this whole circus had been bought and paid for. The Democrat behind the bench didn't even bother to hide his disdain, staring at him like he was just another Republican clown. This wasn't a judgment. It was a political manifesto, a spit in the face, and Jack swore his voice wouldn't drown in this choir of hypocrisy. Losing in the courtroom was just the start of a war that would rage far beyond its walls. It was a regular Wednesday for Jackson Jack Harper, a 40-year-old contractor with a love for hard work, family values, and his MAGA hat. The hat wasn't a political statement to him. It was a part of who he was. But that morning in Washington state, it turned him into a walking target. Jack had parked his old pickup at a convenience store, humming to a classic rock tune, when two cops approached. Their stern faces made it clear this wasn't a friendly chat. "Sir, step aside," one officer said, his hand hovering near his belt like Jack was a threat. "Sure," Jack replied, raising his hands slightly. "What's the issue?" "You fit a description," the officer added vaguely. Jack laughed dryly. The description of what? A guy buying coffee? But they weren't laughing. Within minutes, he was cuffed and shoved into the back of a patrol car. The reason? They said it was suspicious behavior. Jack knew better. It was the hat. By the time Jack stood in front of Judge Robert Ellis, the situation had gone from annoying to outright surreal. Ellis was a local legend, known for his unapologetic liberalism and disdain for anything remotely conservative. Jack's MAGA cap might as well have been a flashing neon sign. Ellis scanned Jack's file with exaggerated interest, then looked up with a smirk. Well, a parking ticket violator and political provocateur. Quite the combo. Jack's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, I'm here because of a parking ticket that was overdue by 1 day. Is that really worth all this?" Ellis leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the show. 1 day a year, it's all the same. You people love to bend the rules, don't you? The courtroom chuckled, but Jack didn't flinch. His knuckles whitened, but he stayed composed. "With respect, I'd like to address the actual charge." "Oh, we'll address it," Ellis replied, flipping a page in the file. "But first, let's talk about decorum. You think wearing that hat in this courtroom is appropriate? This isn't a rally." Jack's temper flared, but he held his ground. "I didn't realize a hat was a criminal offense." "It's not," Ellis shot back, "but being a nuisance is." The tension in the room was thick. A few reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, their cameras discreetly aimed. Jack noticed, and for the first time he felt a flicker of hope. Someone was watching. When the verdict came, it was as absurd as Jack feared. Ellis's voice boomed, dripping with self-satisfaction. "Jackson Harper, for your failure to respect the law, this court sentences you to 1 year in county jail." The room went silent. 1 year. For a parking ticket. Jack's shoulders stiffened as the bailiff approached. "Your Honor," Jack said evenly, "this isn't justice. It's theater." Ellis smirked. "And your hat isn't patriotism. Take him away." As Jack was led out, he glanced at the reporters. He didn't know what would come of this, but he hoped someone would tell the world what had just happened. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations as Jack Harper sat at the defendant's table, his MAGA hat now resting on his lap. The air was thick with tension, and the rows of spectators, mostly journalists and a few curious onlookers, seemed more interested in the spectacle than the case itself. Judge Robert Ellis, a man who exuded smug authority, tapped his gavel with exaggerated nonchalance. "Mr. Harper," Ellis began, eyeing him with mock seriousness, "it's not every day we see such boldness in this courtroom. A parking ticket? And that hat? Quite the statement." Jack met the judge's gaze without flinching. "Your Honor, I'd prefer to stick to the matter at hand. The parking ticket..." Ellis cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Oh, we'll get there, but first let's address the elephant in the room. Your blatant disregard for decorum." The gallery chuckled, and Jack felt his patience wearing thin. "With all due respect, my hat isn't on trial." Ellis smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Perhaps it should be. It's certainly causing a disruption." From the moment the trial began, it was clear this wasn't about justice. Every attempt Jack made to defend himself was met with interruptions, sarcastic remarks, or outright ridicule. The judge seemed more interested in grandstanding than listening. "Your Honor," Jack tried again. "The ticket was overlooked because what? You were too busy planning your next protest?" Ellis interrupted, eliciting more laughter from the gallery. Jack's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. "That's not why, and you know it." Ellis raised an eyebrow. "What I know, Mr. Harper, is that people like you think the rules don't apply to them." "Well, not in my courtroom." The tension in the room was palpable. Jack noticed a few reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks, their cameras discreetly capturing the judge's every word. At least someone was documenting this sham. When the verdict came, it was as absurd as Jack had expected. Ellis straightened in his chair, his tone dripping with self-satisfaction. "Jackson Harper, for your failure to respect the law and your disruptive behavior in this courtroom, I sentence you to 1 year in county jail." A collective gasp rippled through the room. 1 year for a parking ticket. Jack stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face. He glanced around the courtroom, catching the shocked expressions of a few spectators. Even the reporters seemed stunned. The gavel slammed down. "Take him away," Ellis commanded, his smirk widening. As the bailiff approached, Jack rose to his feet, his shoulders squared. "This isn't justice," he said firmly. "It's a joke," Ellis chuckled. "And your hat isn't patriotism. Next case." Just as the bailiff placed a hand on Jack's arm, the heavy courtroom doors creaked open. All heads turned toward the source of the sound. A tall figure stepped into the room, his face shadowed by the sunlight streaming in from the hallway. Gasps filled the air as he walked forward, his presence commanding the attention of everyone present. It was the President of the United States. The courtroom doors creaked open, and the figure stepping through brought the entire room to a standstill. It was the President of the United States, Richard Harper, moving with quiet authority. His sharp suit and commanding presence left no room for doubt. This was a man accustomed to being in charge. The stunned murmurs from the gallery grew louder as people realized who he was. The President's younger brother, Jack Harper, was the man Judge Ellis had just sentenced to a year in jail. Ellis's smirk vanished, replaced by a pale, stunned expression. He fumbled with his gavel as the President strode to the center of the room, ignoring the chaos around him. Journalists scrambled for their cameras, their flashes now constant as they documented every second. "Your Honor," Harper began, his tone calm but firm, "I'd like to know why my brother was sentenced to a year in jail over what appears to be a minor parking infraction." Ellis stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Mr. President, I wasn't aware that he was my brother," Harper finished, his sharp tone cutting through Ellis's excuses. "That shouldn't matter. What should matter is whether he was treated fairly. From what I've seen, he wasn't." Ellis attempted to regain control, his voice trembling. "This court operates independently, Mr. President. The defendant's behavior—" "Stop," Harper interrupted, his gaze piercing. "Behavior? You mean standing up for himself while you mocked him? While you refused him legal representation? While you made this courtroom your personal stage?" The journalists were scribbling furiously, their cameras capturing every humiliating detail of Ellis's unraveling. Jack watched silently, the weight of the moment sinking in. His brother wasn't just defending him, he was exposing the flaws in a system that had turned against him. Ellis wiped his brow, his confidence crumbling. I acted within the law." "No," Harper shot back, his voice cold. "You acted outside it. You let personal bias dictate your rulings. That's not justice, it's arrogance." The President turned to the gallery, his voice now carrying a warning. "This is what happens when we let power go unchecked. This isn't just about my brother, it's about every person who's ever been silenced by those who think the law bends to their will." The words hit like a hammer, and Ellis knew he'd lost. Defeated, he cleared his throat. "The court rescinds the previous sentence. Mr. Harper, you are free to go." The room erupted into whispers, but Jack barely heard them. Relief washed over him as the bailiff stepped back. Harper placed a hand on Jack's shoulder and spoke quietly. "Let's go." As the brothers exited the courtroom, journalists surged forward, shouting questions, their cameras flashing. Jack remained silent, letting his brother's actions speak for both of them. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Videos of the courtroom showdown dominated the news, sparking outrage and admiration across the country. Jack Harper became a symbol of resilience and justice, his unwavering calm in the face of Ellis's bias inspiring millions. Meanwhile, Judge Ellis faced an investigation into his conduct, his reputation in shambles. For Jack, the experience was surreal. What had begun as a nightmare ended with a powerful reminder. Standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you, can turn the tide. And for the first time, his MAGA hat felt less like a target and more like a badge of honor.